Sweet.
I have a huge pool of resources too.
Are we here? Right on. Here we are in the interview room. I've got my friends Amber and Willow, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Y'all want to go?
I'm Amber Johnson. I'm a professor of communication and social justice at St. Louis University, and I am 21 weeks today gestating.
I am Willow Rosen. I'm currently a student at Washington University working on my bachelor's, but in a larger scope, I work on trans and queer reproductive health care as a doula and a childbirth educator, and someday a midwife.
Right on. Awesome. And well, I'm Sarah, and I'll just talk a little bit about my family situation, as I am a human who has given birth to 2 other humans, and I'm also a foster adoptive parent. So I'm excited to talk about this. I think this is a first for the Telethon, which is exciting. Yeah. And so we're just going to have some great conversation about baby making and queer trans baby making and how we manifest having small humans in our lives. So I don't know. Amber, you were just talking about you're writing something at school.
Yes. So I'm an autoethnographer. So I tell stories and then I collect those stories to larger political issues. And so when I found out I was gestating, I immediately started experiencing a lot of the dysphoria around unintelligible bodies, and like I can't even recognize you as a non-binary person now because if you're pregnant, you must be a woman. And I refuse to see anything beyond that. So I said, I better write about this because I'm about to go through some shit for the next 9 months with family, with friends, with people who just don't get it, with coworkers, like the whole gamut. And so as I started sort of gathering my research, I noticed there's actually quite a bit of literature on trans men and pregnancy.
Okay.
And why it's important to affirm pronouns, why it's important to not dead name patients, how those things lead to dysphoria and potentially self-harm, all those things, right? But also why it's important to have conversations about reproductive health, because you don't know what kinds of parts a person has in their body and what those parts are capable of. But what I did not see was information around non-binary pregnancy and what that looks like and what the language should feel like and look like. So my first, I'll say interesting, because interesting is a euphemism for a lot of things. My first interesting experience, my nurse midwife I went to college with, so we're Facebook friends. And I posted something on Facebook early August, basically that said, like, I wish my family and friends would respect my pronouns. Like, it's they, them, like, get it together. It's been too long. And so when I went to my next appointment, she said, oh, I'm so sorry about your pronouns. We're going to use they, them. I'm so happy that I read that. And I'm like, oh, I feel so seen. And then when I got home, I got an update on my health chart that said health issues, gender dysphoria disorder. Did not ask me to put that on there. The entire article is about why they need to monitor me for drug abuse, suicide, ideation, all negative, overwhelmingly negative. And then as I returned, they still don't use the right pronouns. So after all that, it's like all that for what? Oh. So a large part of the last 5 months has just been the fight to just be seen by healthcare providers, more so than family and friends. Family and friends are coming around. Yeah.
Where is your research taking you, Willow, with all of this and baby making and?
Yeah. So over the summer, I did a research study. I gathered a lot of interviews from folks across the country who'd been pregnant since the year 2000 and identify as trans or queer.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a larger scope. And what I did, I had a kind of standard set of questions that I would ask, but I really loved the fact that my interviews were anywhere from 40 minutes to 3.5 hours.
Wow.
Some of them were in person, most of them were in person, some of them were over the phone, coffee shops, people's homes, we'd go out to dinner, it was all over, which was great. Yeah. And everybody's experience was so different, which was also really fascinating. And working with my project advisor over the semester to figure out, okay, well, how can we whittle this into snippets to share on posters for symposiums and papers and presentations for conferences. And she's like, okay, so what was the unifying theme? And I was like, well, there wasn't one. And she was like, no, but tell me the thing that everybody said was pretty much true. And I was like, that's not a thing. It's not a thing. And she goes, well, there's your unifying theme.
Oh, wow.
So I was really fortunate to have a faculty advisor that was really present and was able to kind of show up for whatever the research looked like and to keep learning, because she doesn't have specific experience with trans issues, but she has really liked a lot of the research I was doing and is integrating it into her curriculums for the different things that she teaches. So that was really exciting, and I don't think I could have done this project without that type of support. So yeah, I was finding that everybody's experience was so widely different, and what everybody wanted, one of the last questions I asked for every interview was, what do you want me to do with this? You know, I know what work I would like to do. What do you want me to do? And everyone said to different degrees to share it, which makes sense. You know, if they're talking to me, then to some extent they want their story shared. They want to talk about it. Whether it was with the medical field or with the community itself, because they wanted more possibility models. And it was fascinating as a non-binary person myself who hopes to get pregnant within the next year, to hear these interviews. Like, part of the reason I was so focused in this project and able to keep going was because I needed the information.
Right.
You know, I have this collection of research that I did for this project and research that other trans researchers have done and compiled in this really neat database. But a lot of it was either very medical, like, okay, so here are the steps, and still oddly insufficient. And it talks about just kind of consolidating what you do for a trans patient into one article. And it's like, okay, well, respect pronouns, like you were saying, so suicide is less likely. Okay, but there's a lot more there.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, I think
it's almost dehumanizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, take the human out of the picture, and here's a list. And if you get this checklist right, you're fine.
Right, well, then you're doing a good job.
You're doing a great job.
And you're an inclusive doctor.
Wow.
And so that was incredibly frustrating, because it also, the onus is still a lot on trans clients and patients to inform their doctors and their midwives and their doulas. And I'm very excited to start, there's a wave starting where folks are doing certifying programs or workshops and things like that to add in a little more knowledge, but it's still pretty early.
Where are good possibility models? Like, where are you seeing trans queer birth work being done well?
I don't know. Tell me. Point me.
Well, I went to a conference also this summer and met a few really exciting people. There's, and I wish I had written a list to get ready for this moment.
Sure.
But I know that there's the Seahorse Doula, and of course that's the only one that's coming up. But there are folks, the coasts you see a little bit more.
Well, sure.
But there's also been a bigger push. There's a lot of midwifery in the Midwest and in rural areas.
Sure.
So there's an interesting cross-section where sometimes you see very Christian, cisgender, heterosexual white women where midwifery is their calling. And like, that's so much of that space.
Yeah.
And then there's more attention and thankfully more national funding being paid for midwives of color, or specifically Black midwives, to be recognized by these organizations that have been taking over and have taken over for the last several decades and claimed midwifery as their own. And then a smaller push, but getting louder and louder and louder, of LGBTQIA midwives. And I use the longer acronym because people are starting to share those pieces of their identity a little bit more and adding that into their practice.
Sure.
And not as fast as I would like to see it. But it is happening.
In terms of, I was thinking more institutionally. But in terms of individuals, I do know two doulas who are very affirming, and that's Brittany Farrell. She's actually doing a documentary on non-binary and trans parenting and childbirth.
Really?
Yes, hopefully it'll be out soon. And then Adrienne Marie Brown, a lot of people don't know this, but she's a doula. And super affirming. Yeah, so that's two people that I do know who are on the interpersonal level trying to make strides. But in terms of like systemically, not so sure. Yeah.
So we're just charting it ourselves.
Basically.
How is this pregnancy, this gestation, presenting differently than your others?
I mean, in the first two, I was very much I was married to a man. I did not identify as non-binary at the time. I thought that what I experienced was what everyone experienced, right? Like my queerness and my non-binaries was like I'm just a tomboy and women are beautiful. Duh, everybody feels that way. And so it took me a while to figure out, actually, you're a little bit different. Maybe you should, sit with yourself for a little while. So now, because I have a language and an anchor, it's very different, and a lot of it's in my head, of course, but just even how I talk about myself, I mostly only use neutral words for everything that I can. I was at Kaiser Hospital in California visiting my dad, and apparently the labor and delivery floor had a tour, and there were literally 50 pregnant people, and I was like, I'm not with y'all. But just people looked at me like, why are you calling pregnant people? I was like, because I don't know what their gender identity is. It's become it's like part and parcel of just my life now.
Yeah.
But it's hard, because I'm gestating, when I talk to other people about it, I have to remember that that's not their life. And so right now I wrestle with like literally every hour, do I want to have this conversation?
Right.
Because sometimes I just don't feel like it, especially with a stranger who I'm never going to see again.
Right.
It's like, how much labor can I invest right now? Because my body's already using, 90% of its labor to build a human.
Right.
So, yeah, it's very different. Very different.
So where do we start? Like, there are some small things, but like locally, I have such faith, if that's the right word, in this city, in this community. Like, we are badass. Like, we are on the front of so much, and we have so much potential, and living in a region that's problematic AF for sure, and has so much opportunity with low cost of living, and a lot of things that people have access to arts-wise, et cetera, even not making a living wage. Like, we can still get access. And we have trans-wise, a garden, we have our own house, we own property, we have housing. So how can we bring on in trans and queer baby making, that's just, I'm liking that, I don't know, into this, like, what do you see? What could you do? Waving the wand, right?
I mean, one of the things you were talking about, these rural women who feel called to midwifery, maybe there are trans and queer people in our community who are also called, and who's training them to become, right, hello? So like, can we create accessible spaces so those folks can become doulas and be the people that help people like me who are just like, I don't know what to do.
Yes.
Like, what does it look like to pass on that knowledge and lift up healthcare providers who don't just get trained to deal with trans and non-binary people, but are they themselves trans and non-binary people?
Yes.
So it becomes intrinsic, right? I'm not an anomaly. I'm just a human like you. And I don't necessarily need to be watched for drug addiction at this point in my life. Maybe you should ask me about that and we can have a conversation.
Right.
Instead of you just making these broad assumptions that all of our pregnancies are the same, all of our baby making is the same.
Yes.
Because it's not.
Right.
One of my students was talking to an administrator in another department who I knew from undergrad. So I've known this woman for 20 years. And my last partner was a non-binary person who most people read as a woman. And so when my student told her I was pregnant, her actual response to a student on campus was, how did that happen?
Wow.
So it's like, right?
Right.
And I've never once had a conversation with her about my sexuality.
Wow.
And there are so many ways to get pregnant.
Yes.
And those ways are utilized by cis women, non-binary people, trans women. They're utilized by so many people because traditional pregnancy is not always possible.
Right.
Period, regardless of your gender identity.
Right.
So even for her to ask that question just shows how far we have to go to get people on board with like this whole process.
Yeah. That is, yeah.
Yeah, and I've found that to be true in doing this research and in talking to folks more casually too. It's everything. We just have to do everything. It's fine.
Yes.
It's great.
Everything's fine.
But just talking about it, so I do this anyway when I'm excited about stuff. I just go on and on about it. And this is one of those things that I try to mention in all the spaces. And when I decided to go back for my bachelor's, 10, 12 years after high school, and after a portion of midwifery school, it was with the intention of carrying that through every step of my education. Okay. So in all the classes I was in, I was talking about, well, did you know this about pregnancy? And did you know that queer people get pregnant too?
Right.
And did you know about trans people getting pregnant? And so I try to plant seeds, and then sometimes it's incredibly exhausting and you just don't.
Yep.
But I think having people from the community become doulas and become support folks. The Transgender Spectrum Conference, there was a trans buddy system that was utilized in another area of the country, and I dream of shifting that into a system where folks who are going in for appointments, pregnancy related or not, have basically a doula. And what that would be is you meet before your appointment, you lay out what you want to get out of the appointment, what questions you need, what you have to leave there knowing. They go with you, and then they process what the hell just happened.
Wow.
Because something's going to happen.
Unfortunately, right. And I think that's a big step. And I think part of that too is with another person in the room, there's a little more room for self-advocacy. And then there's an awareness for the provider that person needs another person in the room.
Right.
Because they are not doing it.
Yeah.
They're not doing it as well as they need to be doing it. And then also, talking to, I know there are a few people in the city working towards educating folks at Planned Parenthood. One of the things I'd like to do over the next year is meet with the midwives and doulas that are willing and do trainings with them over the course of a few years to talk about how to be more inclusive. I said years. It'll probably be years. I would like it to be months, right?
Sure.
But that education is hopefully ongoing. So talking to who's already there, integrating more folks and supporting them and becoming, from the community, ready to serve the community is big. And Jama Birth Village is doing a really good job in Ferguson of modeling a similar issue.
Yeah.
And, midwives from that community are serving that community. And
so is that a possibility model that could be utilized in queer community specific? Does Jamba center queer folks in their...
I think Brittany Kelman is focused a lot on the mental health care, the healthcare disparities that affect specifically African American women, and especially in Ferguson and in that area. And so I think that's one of her large focuses, but that's another conversation I'll be having hopefully soon, is talking with her and seeing about how we can work together. Sure. And how we can refer when folks fit better in different spaces and acknowledge, who can best fill that space, who is most at home in those spaces.
No, that's real. That's real. Because when I was choosing who was going to birth my child, I had to decide if I wanted a social justice doctor who understood Black women and infant mortality in that language, or someone who understood my gender identity. And one of those things could kill me. One of those things is less likely to kill me, right? So I picked a doctor. She happens to be white, but I asked my friend who I went to college with, you worked with her for 15 years. She's like, no, she gets it. Okay, so I don't need to go in there and advocate for myself in terms of don't let me die in childbirth, right? But then I have to deal with her not understanding pronouns. Right. Right. So yeah, it'd be nice to have a place where I know I can go and be my whole self. Because I pass as cisgender in most spaces, especially because I'm gestating at this point, I have a lot less. The problems that arise from invisibility are internal, right? Okay. They don't manifest as these external things like death and things, right? So that's why I chose to go with a doctor who understood you can't let me die. But I should not have had to make that choice. No. I shouldn't have had to make that choice.
And that's one of my big dreams and goals. And I think it's very doable. And I think that, Brittany Kelman is one midwife, but her reach has already been incredible, just absolutely incredible. And the work that she's doing, is, for me, it's a personal model. It's, you know, that's the dream, right? And for our community. So I think working where we are and seeing where we fit and seeing what we need, right? Like, what do I want to be available by the time I get pregnant? I don't think it's all going to be there. But again, I'll be picking, you know, what fits enough.
Right. Now I have a question for both of you and all the viewers. Y'all could chime in. So I wanted to raise this baby gender neutral, and I took the DNA test at 10 weeks because apparently I'm old. I'll be 40 next year, so I'm a geriatric pregnancy.
Wow.
So they just wanted to make sure everything was cool. All right, fine, whatever. So they told me the sex of the baby at 10 weeks, right? But nobody asked me if I knew yet because people assume you don't know that early.
Sure.
But once I really started to show and I hit 20 weeks where they do the anatomy scan, everybody's like, oh, good, so you know the sex. And I wanted to keep it a secret. And just the only people who would know the sex is people who change the diaper. But I'm a horrible liar. So when people say, you know, do you know the sex yet? Usually they say, do you know if you're having a boy or a girl?
Yeah.
And I try to, like, through gritted teeth say no, but then yes just comes out of my mouth. And like, well, what is it? And I'm just like, ah! So the cat's out of the bag.
Okay.
So now I want to know, what does it mean to raise a child in a gender neutral home when people know the gender? Well, they assume they know the gender based on knowing the sex. And like, what are some best practices? So like, you're raising a wonderful trans kid. I'm raising a trans kid, but my kid didn't talk to me about that until they were a little bit older.
Yep.
But a baby can't tell me, this is how I feel.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, like, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. Do you have? I mean, our young human Oliver raised himself. Really. I mean, you know, he came to us through foster care with a pink bow glued to the top of his head, just in case we didn't know. It was literally like, because he didn't have much hair, so they glued it to the top of his head. And he came onto the table and we're like, oh, well, okay. And, you know, the baby was raised with a variety of options and all the things in the way that they dressed and the toys that they got to play with, all the things, right? As gender neutral, I suppose, as that goes, but they had a name that was feminine-ish. And, but, you know, from jump, that child they always looked out of place wearing clothing that was for the sex assigned at birth. And we just chalked it up to, well, that's a rough little girl, you know?
Right.
And, but he proclaimed early on that, that's not me. That doesn't work. And so, I have friends who are raising a child in that way as the best that I've ever seen. Okay. And they just put so many options in front of that child and listen and listen and listen. Okay. And I think that it's tough though. Gosh, people want you to pick a team right away.
Super
I mean,
fast.
have you seen this come out? Have you seen good possibility models of people raising babies like that?
Yeah, I think. So I've also worked as a nanny, so I've been able to interact with folks in all different kinds of family ways, which is super cool. And I've seen, not specifically with that intention is starkly laid out to, you know, this kid, we're going to do as much to keep them gender neutral as possible, but that expanse of options I've seen a lot. And even when people didn't have a lot of literacy around gender, there's this kind of wave of the unimportance of certain roles, whether they define the gender or not. And so, I mean, I think the options is exactly where it's at. And then I'm a huge advocate of books, you know? So books, there are a handful of really cool ones that model kids in different expressions of their gender, and trans or not. And I think that that's a really great way to show possibility and keeping them involved with the community. You know, you get to meet adults and other kids that are just figuring it out. Right. And I think that normalizes a lot. Right. And that's, the environment, options, and I always advocate for books. So
awesome. Yeah, I actually just shared for the Trans Advocacy Day the list of books about trans kids. So buy a few sets.
Right.
I have a good friend, Charles Xavier, who lives in Baltimore. Shout out to Charles Xavier. he told me something in our interview when I was interviewing for the Transfuturism Project that really helped me deal with knowing the baby's reproductive organs. And he said, it's not that I wish my doctor or my parent hadn't assigned me female at birth. I wish they would have said that just doesn't mean they're going to be a girl. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that option is there.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah, and I think having possibility models in front of our young humans, you know, I know a lot of trans folks who knew from the time they were 3 or 4 or 5 years old that they were trans. I did not know until I was an adult because I didn't know any trans people.
Exactly.
I didn't know it was a possibility.
Right.
Same.
And so if I met a trans guy when I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, I'd been like, wow, didn't.
Yeah.
So I think that, and it does excite me to think about this. You know, when Sharona and I first started having babies, when I started having babies with Sharona 20 years ago, we did not have community really, but there is like this little pretty massive group of young humans that are being raised by queer folks, and I think making sure that we gather them all together and having that intentional community, I think that can help, right?
We need to have a family reunion.
That's it. And just dismantling that gender, because they'll do it for us, right?
Yes.
These, you know, these humans, these younger humans, and of course our peers, but in particular, I believe our younger humans are just like dismantling gender.
They are.
As the way that we were spoon-fed it, right?
So, and they do it so easily.
Yes.
It's really cool.
So easily.
Yep.
I feel like I might have shared this last year at the telethon. I don't remember. But I talk to my kids about gender all the time. And I remember one year asking Axel, so a spork has used the bathroom. Does it go in the fork bathroom or the spoon bathroom?
Okay.
And they were like, it goes in whatever bathroom it feels like going in. And I was like, that's such a simple idea. And then they said, no, wait. It's all just one bathroom. Like, why are we even having this conversation? And they were like 4.
Yeah.
4 years old. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
Right.
And now though, but see, again, there's so many external forces. When I found out the baby sex, I did tell the kids because they were asking.
Yeah.
And they both got mad.
Oh.
We wanted a little brother. And I said, okay, pause. You two children of all people should know that just because a child is born with a particular organ does not mean that they are going to identify in that way.
Right.
Hello, Axel. Amara, you have a little brother who is rougher than you, stronger than you, bigger than you, beats you up, and does all the stereotypical boy things in the world, right? And I'm just like, clearly you two are modeling that it doesn't matter what your organs are. How you identify is something that is deeply personal, and it's your business, right? It's got nothing to do with these external forces. So it's hard seeing that happen because, like, no matter how hard I try, there's still millions of other voices circulating.
Oh, yes.
Which enforces the idea that we need community even more so that there's more voices than just mine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Family picnics.
There we go.
Righteous.
Big
Well,
fans.
and centering, you know, folks in our community as possibility models, right? And having that visibility too.
Yeah.
An intentional community for each other.
Right. Like, I wish I could come hang out with your friends with this baby.
Yes.
And see, what does it look like to give a baby options?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's lovely and it's beautiful, and you know, St. Louis is just this cauldron of possibility. So I think we're gonna just lead it from the Midwest,
There
right?
we go.
I'm with it.
Absolutely.
We've been leading a lot of stuff.
That's right.
We might not lead like the arts and entertainment world, but we lead some other stuff.
We do, and you know, I just think having accessibility to arts and entertainment too for folks is pretty.
That we do lead,
That's
right?
powerful.
Almost every museum in the city is free.
I know. I hear
That's
people
a big
fussing
deal.
about that fish museum or aquarium. And I'm like, oh, fish, mish, go to the art museum, you know.
Right.
And I'm not discounting the fish. It's fine. It's lovely. But, I mean,
Right.
one thing of a billion things that we can have to pay for. All right. So I've got these gifts we're giving folks because your visibility is important, and every year we get these posters designed by a local trans expansive human, and this is this year's, and it's your support is vital to our liberation. And I believe that both of you all and the voices that you have and the voices that you use and the space that you take up is vital to local liberation for trans expansive folks.
This is beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you. We trying.
Right on.
Yeah, we out here trying.
Well, we appreciate you so much.
and we appreciate you
Right
and MTUG and all that
Yeah.
y'all do.
So now what we're here for, y'all, is to get folks to donate money to the organization. We are an organization that relies heavily on donors. There are limited amounts of grants for trans-expansive organizations. So we really rely on folks like you to donate your treasure to our organization. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of work with a little bit of money, y'all.
Yeah.
And we need you to give it over and support us. We are looking for monthly sustainable donors, and we're looking for folks with a one-time donation. And we just really appreciate it, and we need you, and appreciate y'all, and need y'all.
Me too.
And I guess we're going to send it on over to the big room. Y'all ready? Now.